Britain's economy has been in trouble for over half a decade. Its once rock-solid banking system continues to depend on government support as the country seeks to recover from the deepest recession in recent history. The Treasury is where decisions are made which can make or break the economy. That's where Britain's financial manager, Chancellor George Osborne, is seeking to make a further £25 billion worth of cuts to balance the enormous deficit in the country's finances. Those decisions affect the banks here and the people everywhere. The Chancellor has said it would be a very odd choice to leave the welfare budget untouched. Worrying news indeed for those who depend on government support to pay their bills. Osborne also says that 2014 will be the year of hard truths. And all the while, the UK account deficit with the rest of the world has tripled. By autumn of 2013, it was at its highest level in 24 years. How do the public judge the performance of their government? Who do they blame for the current economic mess? Do they trust the people elected to put it right? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. We began by asking the public what they knew of the challenges facing Britain's economy. So what do you know about the challenges facing Britain's economy?
Well, I know there's a lot of debt, and I know there's a lot of things that need to change to move things forwards.
Only sort of what I hear in the news, I think the biggest thing that's relevant to me is graduates being unable to find work and how that's affecting me financially. But on a wider scale, I would have to say I don't know too much about it.
Well, it's been pretty harsh at the moment, but I think it'll be better in the long run. I think we've got to sort of dab it all down so we can get it back up again, which is what we're actually doing at the moment.
What do you know about the challenges facing Britain's economy?
Well, I think there's a lot to be recovered. There's quite a serious banking crisis, which led to a crisis of confidence. People are taking on too much debt personally, and companies and the government.
Yeah, very challenging times. I would consider that it's still quite unstable. I don't have a lot of faith in it at the moment. I don't think the way that it's going at the moment is necessarily the true picture. And I think there are more challenging times ahead. So, in answer to your question, my faith is not wholly great, let's say.
Well, there's all this business about the deficit and the need to make cuts in the so-called austerity programme. I'm not sure I'm 100% convinced that it's totally necessary, but I think certainly something needs to be done along those lines. We just can't carry on a sort of present level of spending, and we have to look carefully at what the government is and isn't doing.
So that's what the public said. We turn to our experts to get their perspective on Britain's economic challenges.
The British economy has massive challenges, notably that it's completely dependent on the financial sector, and the financial sector has completely warped the economy in this country, which is one reason we have such very high levels of inequality, and that in many ways our democracy has been undermined by the bankers and others in the financial sector who control our economy. One big product of this is the enormous amount of private debt that we've got, the amount of debt that ordinary individuals have got, and the amount of debt that is owed by and to the banks. And that really is the fundamental reason for the economic crisis that we've been living through for the last 5 years. There is a narrative, a story that's been made up by the government that the crisis was caused by overspending on public services, but it's not true, and everyone in politics knows it's not true. It's about the overwhelming power of finance in this country and the way that controls and rules our lives.
The current situation is everyone keeps talking about economic recovery, and actually most people don't care about GDP or other measures of activity like that. They care about whether they're feeling better off or worse off. And the reality is, for most people, they're worse off, even as the so-called recovery takes hold.
Next, we asked the public who or what is to blame for Britain's economic mess. What do you think caused Britain's economic mess?
I think it was that I think we really wanted growth. It was partly greed, but I don't like to use that word, but I think we were chasing growth and we forgot to read the small print on a number of things.
Probably the government spending too much money on things they shouldn't have.
The current
mess, I think, has been primarily caused by irresponsible lending and over-speculation in the financial markets. I think underneath that, we've lost our place in the world because we've moved away from manufacturing. Right from Thatcher's days, when there seemed to be a view that we could make a living selling insurance and ice cream to each other, and I don't think we can.
What do you think caused Britain's economic mess?
Credit, people, credit cards. The curse of credit, I think, and now is the time to pay back.
Probably because we got a bit greedy, and we, like I said, we spent more than we could afford.
Incompetence, maladministration, and a little bit of bad luck.
Is there a clear explanation of who or what's to blame? Our experts said this.
The economic mess that we're living in this country was caused by banks that had been given astounding amounts of freedom from the 1980s onwards, and were essentially gambling with every aspect of life. Here we've just been running a campaign on food speculation, which looks at the way that banks the gambling which banks are involved in is driving up food prices around the world and making those food prices very volatile as well. So it's difficult for people to plan, and it's pricing people out of food. That's one example of the power that finance, banks, hedge funds and other financial institutions have got over the basics of life. It was this same power that caused the crisis in our economy. It's the huge quantities of public debt created by the financial sector, which was shifted onto the public sector when the banks were bailed out. And now it's ordinary people in this country who are paying the price for that through austerity, those same people that had nothing to do with the mess that we're in.
The cause of the crisis is really quite simple. It's a crisis of investment. What we have is a situation where total output has fallen by about £40 billion, but investment has fallen by over £70 billion. And within that, the most important factor is that the fact that businesses aren't investing. They're just refusing to invest and are piling up money in bank accounts, paying it out to shareholders, but doing everything but investing.
The effects of recession can be very personal. We invited the public to share difficulties that they or people they knew have experienced as a result of the recession and the austerity measures. Can you tell us of any financial difficulties that you or someone you know has experienced as a result of the austerity measures and the recession?
Well, my brother's just recently graduated from university, sort of last year with a 2-1 in maths from a good university. He's finding it a lot harder to find jobs than I did at that time in my life as well. So.
I think pretty much everybody I know has been affected, whether it's sort of friends of mine unable to find work, or sort of older members of my family that have had jobs for generations yet aren't able to get mortgages, finding it very hard to get onto the property ladder, and I think it's affected everybody.
No, not really, no. But I'm okay, but I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that's having a few problems without a doubt, And but it's tough times, and you've seen what it's like on the continent with the problems they've got in all the other countries. And I think it's just we're actually making a better fist of it than the others,
Can you tell us of any financial difficulties you or people you know have experienced as a result of the recession and the austerity measures?
Well, where I work with families, and I've noticed a lot of changes with families where they've got a lot less money coming in, benefits are changing, so they get less that way. Personally, I haven't had a pay rise for 5 years, so I think it's affecting everyone, really.
All sort of problem we have. We don't have enough money, not even to buy food anymore. That's the main problem. We cannot pay anything. We cannot save like we used to. And that's the main problem. We can't give any future to the kids.
Sure, the first one is that my pension went through the floor in 2008, and you can see I'm getting close for pensionable age, so that was an enormous shock. Whilst it's crept back up to about where it was, my pension is not going to be what it was 2008. I've had some of my pension in Equitable Life. Some of my mortgage was the wrong kind of mortgage, and so I've been hit 2 or 3 times actually.
Generally, I used to work in financial services, strangely enough, and I decided that with the enormous collapse we had in, was it 98, I'd change my career. So there is a lot of meddling in business, a lot of red tape, which rather impinges on people's best efficient way of working and businesses to be working. I know we can't have a free-for-all, but people are suffering.
What are the major impacts on British citizens? Our experts gave their view on the practical effects of the recession on ordinary people.
You only need to look around a handful of your friends if you're living in London to know the impact that austerity is having on them. People who are unemployed and live on housing benefits, for example, which is being cut and have had to move house. Personally, the people I know are probably the luckier ones, because for many people who have a house that's now considered too big for them as a result of the bedroom tax that's being brought in as part of the austerity measures, they're actually having to move to completely different locations, despite the fact they may have lived where they're living for their whole lives. People's lives in this country are really, really changing. People's access to the basics, to food and to shelter and to warmth through energy bills and prices going up and so on. It's really changing our society. We're beginning to see food banks appearing in this country, giving out free charitable food donations for people who can't afford food anymore. People are having to live off charity. This is something we haven't seen on such a scale for many, many years, since the Second World War probably. And it's a sign, unfortunately, of things to come.
Well, I think the fall in living standards means that people's poverty is quite widespread. I think you can see it every day of the week. When you go shopping, you see people collecting for food banks. I know people who struggle to pay heating bills. That's the reality of the so-called recovery. The fact is that we're getting poorer, most of us, and you have the extraordinary situation where Britain, which is the 6th or 7th richest country in the world, now has food banks on a widespread basis. It has the Red Cross making collections for this country. It really is a terrible situation for many people.
Even after all this austerity, Britain's financial manager, Chancellor George Osborne, says he's looking for a further £25,000 million worth of cuts. What's the public reaction to this? Britain's Chancellor and effectively financial manager George Osborne says that after all this austerity, a further £25,000 million in cuts need to be made to public spending. How do you feel about that?
The government, I think, it's so vast, there's so many costs. I think, there will have to be streamlining, and unfortunately I think somebody's got to departments do have to take the brunt of it. I think, we just need to make sure that we're thinking about the long term and not just short term numbers to make the budget fit for the year. It's so difficult to we look at there are cuts happening in DEFRA, there are cuts happening all across, the civil service, and I think it's just making sure that we are actually streamlining and we're not just trying to fit into a quota for this year, really, which is difficult when we have such a free press, with lots of different stories, lots of different sides of it, really. We don't really get a clear picture, I think. So, we've got to support whoever's in power to get the job done, really. So.
The arts gets cut, and then people with disabilities, their money gets cut, and so I think it's always the bottom of the triangle that suffers and feels it, and the top 5% who are controlling the money, they don't feel it. So it's really the education, it's the arts, it's the creative industries which suffer, and then other countries will pick up, and you move 10 steps behind.
Britain's financial manager, the Chancellor George Osborne, says that after all this austerity, a further £25,000 million of cuts need to be made in public services. How do you feel about that?
It's beyond my control, first and foremost. How do I know what is right and wrong? If this is the way, the government are steering the ship, if this is the way they need to do this, then I'm behind it. But I don't really have a choice. So I don't like it. but I'm not in control.
I would say with that, it's not really an answer, but yes and no. I think there are cuts perhaps still to be made, but where they're actually apportioned is another thing. I'm not wholly in agreement with things like closing down fire stations, cutting the police budgets with the NHS, and I don't think there's a lot of confidence in the public sector at the moment. So I am somewhat concerned about that, because obviously, if there are concerns and the morale and everything else that's associated with that are low within those sectors, it will impact on us as well. We all want to have an ambulance turn up when you're in need, or a fire engine or a police car. And I think, and the way it's going, what with the cuts and how that would impact on morale and resources, I think is a concern for us all.
How do you react to that?
I read something the other day about him wanting to sort of cut sort of dole benefits and that sort of thing, which I agree with, because I think if somebody's able to work, then they should. But then the problem is, so many people that are able to work aren't able to get jobs. So I think whilst he's got some interesting theories, unless he shows some practical ways of actually putting them into practice, it's all a bit useless talk.
How achievable are cuts of this magnitude? Our experts shared their opinion.
The Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne's announcement about the £25 billion of cuts that he's going to go into the next election proposing is just another example of the way that the poorest people in our society have been made to pay for the crimes of the richest, for the 1% who have gained as a result of financial deregulation and privatisation over the last 30 years that's driven our economy over the abyss, but have emerged from it richer than ever. It's the poorest people who are being made to pay through cuts to benefits, through cuts to, for example, unemployment and housing benefit, but also to the health service, also to our education sector, where there are huge cuts and huge amounts of privatisation, private capital being brought in to control it. This is changing the whole face of our economy, and it's amazing that after this has been going on for 5 years, the Chancellor is still saying we need more cuts to be made, we need more cuts to be made. These cuts are clearly doing nothing to improve the lives of the majority of people of this country. What they're doing is allowing those responsible for the crisis that we're living through to walk away richer than they were before the crisis that they created. So it's an enormous injustice, and it's why many organisations like mine that traditionally have worked on so-called third world issues in the developing world of poverty, are also now looking at the injustices of an economic situation in Europe, which has huge similarities with debt crises and financial crises and structural adjustment that have been pushed on Latin America, Africa and Asia over the last 30 years.
The idea that Osborne has been promoting, that a very large chunk of further cuts is necessary, is really quite outrageous. It's the politics of failure, and it's the politics of, it meets Einstein's definition of madness, of carrying on doing something, expecting a different result. All that happens is we have a very, very weak economy and people get poorer. What's actually needed to address the crisis is increased investment. And if firms won't do it, government can.
Finally, we turn to a question of trust. To what extent do the public feel that those who manage Britain's finances know what they're doing? How much trust do you have that the people managing the country's finances know what they're doing?
Little.
Why is that?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding. I mean, sure, things are bouncing back now, but if you look at the length of time it's taken, it's a ridiculously long time. So, as I say, I think it's sort of Tory idealism, so ideology disguised as economic necessity.
I have to trust them because they're a government, but I think they could make a lot of improvements.
The majority of the people, they don't know what they're doing, and they don't know how to handle it. I don't know if I answer you. It's just a few. It's all politics, in my mind. They should start from them. In the family is a man who rules the family. So in a country is head that they rule the country, so they have to do something about themselves first.
How much trust do you have that the people managing the country's finances know what they're doing?
Very little. They haven't exactly got a good track record of late, so I can't say I've got an awful lot of confidence, no.
That is the tricky question of the lot, isn't it? I would say, by and large, yes. I think I have a fair level of trust. I don't agree with everything they're doing, but I think on the whole, I would say they're probably on the right lines, yeah.
Completely none at all. Like, none at all. Absolutely none. No. I think a lot of them should be in prison at best, in my opinion. So.
Is this a fair assessment by the public? Our experts shared their opinions.
There's a big debate as to whether the people that are running our finances, and indeed the finances of many countries in the world today, are simply incompetent and don't know what they're doing, or whether they're actually following some sort of plan and they do know what effect their policies are going to have. Now, we've seen these policies of austerity, privatisation, liberalisation, deregulation, pushed onto country after country, starting with Latin America in the late 70s, early 80s, through to Africa in the late 80s, and then East Asia in the late 90s, where financial crises, debt crises have been used to shock societies into pushing a whole host of policies that benefit the very richest, but don't benefit ordinary people and make society more unequal. It beggars belief that people who are running our economy have not looked at those facts and figures and have not seen the impact of those policies on their society. So although I think there's bits of incompetence in probably all governments and all countries in the world, I think that these policies, decision makers know what these policies, the impact of these policies are, and so there is a plan, and you can see that right through Europe at the moment. Our economy isn't recovering; it's not getting better for the majority, for the vast majority, and so to push more and more and more of the same policies in those situations is really criminal.
Well, the terrible shame of it all is that I sometimes have friends say to me that they don't know, that the government and their advisors don't know what they're doing. Unfortunately, I don't think that's true. I think they do know what they're doing. This concerted attack on living standards is done under the name of deficit reduction. But under their heroine, Margaret Thatcher, it was done under the name of monetarism. And in fact, it's been done repeatedly. It's about driving down wages and living standards in order to drive up profits.
Britain's reputation and stability have taken massive hits in the last few years. Chancellor George Osborne's decision to make further spending cuts, largely on services rather than just military and security expenditure, are a massive gamble, and the stakes are high. If he gets it right, there could be some winners. If he gets it wrong, there could be 66 million losers, and that's a price Britain cannot afford to pay.